I can still remember the sound of that envelope hitting the table. It was sharp, final, like the crack of a whip across my skin. The clatter of cutlery stopped. Conversations died mid-laugh. Every pair of eyes at that wedding reception turned toward me, the woman holding a piece of paper trembling in her hand. Her jaw tight, her eyes flashing with something between fury and liberation. That piece of paper wasn't just an envelope. It was the bill, the final tally of my daughter's wedding. All $7,000 of it shoved at me as if I were nothing more than a human checkbook, a living ATM. And at that moment, with my chest burning and my palms slick with sweat, I finally snapped. I didn't whisper. I didn't tuck it away. I raised that bill up high for everyone to see and said, "This is what my family thinks of me." Not as a mother, not as a human being, just as a wallet. Well, I'm done. I'm not your ATM anymore. Gasps rippled through the hall. Chairs scraped against polished floors. Someone dropped a glass, and it shattered like the very illusion of family love I had been clinging to for years. My daughter's face went pale. My ex-husband turned scarlet, and whispers flared like wildfire across the tables. I knew in that instant that nothing would ever be the same again. But to understand how I got there, to that precise moment of explosive defiance, you'd have to go back months, years even, to the beginning of the slow erosion of respect and love in my family. Because that bill wasn't just money, it was the final insult in a long, bitter war of emotional neglect, financial exploitation, and betrayal that had hollowed me out until I had nothing left to lose. I raised my children almost entirely on my own. My ex-husband, Daniel, is the kind of man who appeared generous in public but shriveled to nothing when the lights dimmed and the doors closed. He'd leave $100 tips at restaurants just to make waiters call him sir. But when the bills came for the children's school supplies or the heating in winter, he'd shrug and say, "You handle it? You always do." And I did. I worked double shifts at the hospital, picked up extra weekend jobs, clipped coupons, wore the same pair of shoes until the soles thinned out. Also, my kids wouldn't feel the pinch of what he refused to contribute. My daughter, Rachel, was the jewel of his eye, but not in the way a father should admire his daughter. He saw her as an extension of himself. When she excelled in school, it was because of his genes. When she landed a job interview, it was his connections. And when she announced her engagement to a man named Derek, a banker's son with a smile too polished to be real, Daniel swelled with pride, not because Rachel was happy, but because it meant a grand wedding, a stage to show off his status, his taste, his success. Only he wasn't planning on paying for any of it. "Mom," Rachel said one afternoon, twirling the diamond Derek had slipped on her finger, "we've been looking at venues and, well, Dad says you'll help cover the deposits, just until we figure out the budget." I was standing in our modest kitchen, still in scrubs, my hair pulled back in a tired bun. A faint smell of antiseptic clinging to me. I stared at her, the words sinking like stones in my gut. "Rachel, I'm not sure what he told you, but I can't just, Mom." Her voice hardened, her eyes narrowing in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of Daniel. "You always find a way. You've always said weddings are once in a lifetime. I mean, what kind of mother doesn't help her daughter on her wedding day?" That word mother, used like a weapon, cut deeper than she knew. Or maybe she did know, so I paid. At first, small things, deposits, fittings, invitations. But small things add up. One check bled into another until the stack of receipts in my desk drawer looked like a mountain I couldn't climb. Every time I tried to slow down, Rachel or Daniel would swoop in with another guilt-drenched line. "Don't you want her to have the wedding she deserves? Your daughter will remember this for the rest of her life. Do you want her to remember you as stingy? Just think about how people will talk if the bride's own mother can't contribute. It'll be embarrassing. Embarrassing." That was the word Daniel loved most. He knew I feared shame, the whispers of relatives, the side eyes of neighbors. I had grown up poor in a family where weddings were potlucks and dresses were borrowed. I wanted better for my children. And so I kept paying, biting back the tears when I swiped my card, promising myself I'd figure it out somehow. But there were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering when my daughter had stopped being my little girl and become someone who could look me in the eye and demand I bleed myself dry for her big day. It wasn't just the money. It was the way she'd look at me expectant, cold, like a creditor waiting for a check. The hugs were gone, the thank yous absent. I wasn't mom anymore. I was the bank. One evening, about 2 weeks before the wedding, was sorting through another set of invoices when my son Michael came over. Unlike his sister, Michael had inherited my quiet, observant nature. He noticed things others ignored. "Mom," he said carefully, "why are you paying all this? Shouldn't Dad be helping too?" I sighed, pressing a hand to my forehead. "He says he'll cover some of it later, but you know how he is. He makes promises like confetti." Michael leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Rachel and Derek have money, Mom. Derek's family is loaded. Why are you the one?" His question trailed off, but I could see the anger in his eyes. Not at me, but at the injustice of it. I didn't have an answer. The day of the wedding arrived like a storm. The venue was breathtaking, a chandeliered hall with white silk draping from the ceiling, roses spilling from every table, and a string quartet humming in the corner. Guests murmured their approval, champagne glasses clinking in delicate hands. Daniel strutted around in his tailored suit like a king surveying his castle. And me. I wore a dress I had pulled from clearance 3 years ago, ironed and pressed until it looked almost new. My shoes pinched my toes, but I smiled through the pain because mothers aren't supposed to make scenes. At least, that's what I thought until the bill landed in front of me. The manager of the venue approached quietly, his face polite but firm, and handed me the envelope. "Ma'am, as agreed, the balance is due today." My stomach dropped. I opened the envelope. $7,000. Every penny of the remaining costs. My breath caught in my throat. I glanced toward Daniel, who was busy laughing with Derek's father, a glass of brandy in hand. Rachel was across the room posing for pictures, her gown shimmering like moonlight. This wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. I stood. My chair screeched back, echoing in the hush that followed. My hands shook, but my voice was clear when I held up the paper. "This," I declared, "is what my family thinks of me. $7,000. Handed to me like a tip for a job well done. Do you think I'm your ATM? Do you think I'll keep paying forever? Well, I won't. Not anymore." Faces turned, jaws dropped, whispers hissed through the air like snakes. Rachel's bouquet nearly slipped from her fingers. Daniel finally turned toward me, his face frozen in shock, then twisting into anger. "Mary," he hissed, striding toward me, "what the hell are you doing?" What I should have done years ago. I crumpled the bill in my fist, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall. "I'm done funding your lies. I'm done being used. From this day forward, I'm not your wallet. I'm not your slave. I'm your mother, and if you can't respect me for that, then you don't deserve me at all." Gasps turned into murmurs. Phones appeared, recording, capturing every second. I knew this moment would ripple far beyond these walls. And that was when Rachel's voice cut through the chaos rill, furious, shaking with something I had never heard from her before. "Fine, Mom," she screamed, tears brimming in her eyes. "If you want to ruin my wedding, go ahead. But don't you dare expect to be part of my life after this." The room went silent again. My heart thundered, my breath shallow. I stared at my daughter, the little girl I once rocked to sleep, the child I once bandaged after scrape sand. All I saw was a stranger. But what none of them knew, not Rachel, not Daniel, not Derek's smug father, was that I wasn't finished. I had something they didn't expect. Something that would turn this entire wedding upside down. And finally expose the truth about who had been bleeding me dry all along. I took a deep breath, clutching that bill in my hand, prepared to speak again, and that's exactly when the doors of the hall swung open. A voice rang out, sharp and commanding, cutting through the stunned silence. "Is this the Harris wedding? I need to speak with Mary Harris immediately." The crowd parted like water, and in walked a man in uniform. My blood ran cold. The man in uniform stepped into the hall with a presence that silenced even the most curious whispers. His boots echoed against the marble floor, his badge catching the glint of chandelier light. For a split second, I thought my knees might buckle. A police officer. At my daughter's wedding, Rachel let out a sharp cry, half fear, half outrage. Daniel stiffened, his face blanching, then flushing crimson in waves. Derek's father, ever the banker, clutched his glass like a shield, muttering something to his wife. The officer's eyes scanned the room until they landed squarely on me. "Mary Harris?" he asked, his tone professional, steady. I nodded slowly, my fingers tightening around the crumpled bill in my hand. "That's me, ma'am. I need a word with you privately." A ripple of speculation surged through the guests. Phones lifted higher. I could hear snippets of murmurs. What's happening? Did she commit a crime? Is this about the bill? Rachel's face was twisted with horror. "Mom, what have you done?" "You're embarrassing me." But the officer didn't so much as flinch at her outburst. He waited, patient but immovable, like a wall. I forced my feet to move, my heels clicking against the polished floor. My chest felt hollow, my stomach twisted in knots. My heart raced with dread, yet also with something else. A strange sense of inevitability. Like the storm I'd been walking toward had finally broken open above me. We stepped into the hallway, away from the buzz of shocked guests. The officer closed the door behind us, sealing away the muffled hum of chaos. "Mrs. Harris," he said quietly, lowering his voice, "I apologize for the intrusion. I'm Officer Blake. We've been investigating a matter connected to your ex-husband, Daniel Harris. Some financial irregularities came to light, and your name appeared on several documents. I needed to confirm a few things directly with you." For a moment, my breath caught. The words tumbled through my mind, financial irregularities. Your ex-husband, your name. My voice was barely a whisper. "What kind of irregularities?" Blake pulled out a small folder. Inside were copies of checks, bank transfers, receipts. My checks, my signature, my handwriting. But the amounts, it's inflated. Grossly inflated. These documents suggest, Blake continued carefully, that Daniel has been routing certain wedding expenses through your accounts under your name while presenting them as his own contributions. Essentially, he's been using your financial standing to launder personal debts and make it appear as if you were responsible for covering more than you actually agreed to. Do you have any knowledge of this? My head spun. Pieces clicked together in a grotesque puzzle. The endless requests for deposits, the way Daniel always managed to dodge payments, the way Rachel insisted I always find a way. He had been setting me up, using me as his shield, making me look like the sole provider while secretly siphoning funds for his own debts. I pressed a hand to my chest, my voice trembling. I had no idea. I thought I was just paying for my daughter's wedding." Blake studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "That's what I needed to hear. We've been building a case for weeks, but your cooperation is crucial. We may need you to testify later." I swallowed hard. Testify. Against Daniel. Yes, his tone was firm, but not unkind. And I understand this is difficult. But Mrs. Harris, you deserve to know the truth. He's been exploiting you not just financially, but legally. We'll need to subpoena some of your financial records soon. I wanted to prepare you before the warrant becomes public. For a long moment, silence stretched between us. My mind replayed the years of exhaustion, the nights I cried into my pillow, the way Daniel smirked whenever I pulled out my checkbook. And now, here it was. Proof. Proof that I wasn't paranoid. Proof that I wasn't weak. Proof that I had been betrayed in ways I never even imagined. I nodded slowly. "I'll help. Whatever you need, I'll help." Blake handed me a card. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. I'll be in touch. And for what it's worth, what you did back there, standing up to them, that takes guts." He left his boots fading down the hall, leaving me alone with the echo of my pounding heartbeat. When I walked back into the reception, the air was thick with tension. Daniel was waiting, his jaw clenched, his smile tight as a noose. Rachel hovered beside him, her mascara streaked, her hands trembling around her bouquet. What did he want? Daniel demanded, his voice low. Dangerous. I held his gaze, feeling a strange surge of power swell inside me. For once, I wasn't afraid. Nothing you need to know, I said softly, but my tone carried steel. He narrowed his eyes, searching my face for cracks, but I gave him none. Rachel, however, wasn't so easily deterred. She stormed up to me, her voice breaking. Mom, you've ruined everything. Do you know what people are saying? They think we're broke. They think you're crazy. I cut her off, my voice sharp as a blade. Rachel, do you even hear yourself? Do you hear what you've become? Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. Derek tugged her back, whispering something in her ear, his eyes darting nervously to the crowd. I turned away, my hands shaking, my pulse still racing from the encounter. But deep inside, beneath the fear and the shame, a flame had sparked. For the first time in years, I wasn't just enduring. I was fighting back. The rest of the reception blurred into a haze of awkward silence, forced smiles, and stiff conversation. Guests avoided me like I carried a contagion. Daniel kept his distance, though I could feel his glare burning into my back. Rachel refused to meet my eyes. By the end of the night, as the newlyweds drove away in their decorated car, I stood outside in the cool night air, staring up at the moon. My heart felt heavy, but my spine was straighter than it had been in years. I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When I arrived home, exhaustion hit me like a wave. I kicked off my shoes, sank into the couch, and buried my face in my hands. My phone buzzed with messages, angry relatives, gossiping cousins, even an old friend begging to know what really happened. I ignored them all. Instead, I dialed Michael. He picked up on the second ring. Mom, are you okay? I saw some stuff online. People are saying don't believe any of it. I cut in, my voice trembling but steady. Michael, your father's in trouble, and I think I'm about to be dragged into it. There was a long pause. Then his voice hardened with resolve. Then we'll fight this together. Whatever he's done, he won't get away with it this time. I closed my eyes, relief washing over me. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. But even as I drifted into uneasy sleep that night, I couldn't shake the image of Daniel's face, the fury, the panic, the calculation. He knew the walls were closing in, and a man like him wouldn't go down quietly. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of pounding on my door. I stumbled to the entrance, still in my robe, my heart hammering. When I opened it, a courier stood there, holding a thick envelope. He handed it to me with a curt nod. Delivery for Mary Harris. I tore it open. Inside were legal documents. Papers filed by Daniel himself. He was suing me. The envelope trembled in my hands as though it carried a heartbeat of its own. I tore through the stack of papers, scanning line after line of cold legal text, my stomach lurching with each sentence. Daniel wasn't just suing me, he was accusing me of fraud. According to the documents, I had knowingly misappropriated funds tied to the wedding, siphoning money for my own personal use. The wording painted me as a thief, a manipulator, someone who had sabotaged her own daughter's special day for selfish gain. My knees buckled and I sank into the nearest chair, the papers slipping from my trembling hands onto the floor. Fraud, misappropriation, the kind of words that could destroy a reputation. Ruin a career, strip a person of everything they'd worked their entire life for. Michael's voice came through the speaker of my still open phone. Mom, what happened? Talk to me. I pressed the phone to my ear, my voice cracking. He's suing me, Michael. He's actually suing me. What? Michael's voice exploded with outrage. For what? I whispered the word as if saying it too loudly would make it real. Fraud. There was a long silence on the other end before Michael said, his tone edged with fury. He's trying to bury you. He knows he's cornered, so he's flipping the script. Typical dad. Tears pricked my eyes. I can't fight this, Michael. Lawyers, court fees. How can I possibly... But Michael cut me off, his voice fierce, steady. Mom, you're not alone. I'll help. We'll find a lawyer who can see through his lies. And we'll get Officer Blake involved. You've got the truth on your side. It's the truth. That word clung to me like a lifeline. Later that afternoon, found myself sitting in the office of a lawyer Michael had recommended, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire Evans, whose reputation for dismantling manipulative ex-spouses was almost legendary in town. Claire leaned back in her leather chair, flipping through the stack of legal documents with a practiced eye. She had the kind of presence that filled a room even when she was silent. Finally, she looked up at me, her brow furrowed. "Mary, this isn't just petty revenge. This is a calculated attack. Daniel's trying to shift the financial scrutiny onto you before the police investigation lands on him. He's betting that if he paints you as unstable and dishonest, no one will believe you when the truth comes out." Oh, my throat tightened. "So, what do we do?" Claire's eyes glinted with determination. "We fight back. And we start by subpoenaing every bank statement, every receipt. Every scrap of evidence that shows Daniel has been laundering debts through your accounts. Officer Blake's investigation is a gift. We'll align with it. If Daniel wants war, then war is exactly what he's going to get." Her confidence lit a spark inside me. For the first time since opening that cursed envelope, I felt the faint stirrings of hope. Over the next week, life became a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Claire worked tirelessly, pulling records, contacting witnesses, digging through Daniel's financial skeletons. Michael stayed by my side, cooking meals when I forgot to eat, reminding me to rest when I buried myself in forms. Rachel, on the other hand, was silent. She hadn't called since the wedding. Not a word, not a message. I didn't know if it was Derek whispering poison in her ear or if she truly believed her father's lies. But the silence carved at me like a knife. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by documents, the doorbell rang. My heart lurched when I opened it to find Rachel standing there, her face pale, her eyes shadowed. "Rachel?" I whispered, my voice breaking. She hesitated on the threshold, wringing her hands. "Mom, can we talk?" I stepped aside, my chest aching with equal parts relief and dread. She slipped inside, perching stiffly on the edge of the couch like a guest instead of my daughter. For a long moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting between the stacks of papers and the weary lines on my face. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Dad says you're trying to destroy him, that you're lying about everything. And people online, they're saying awful things, Mom. Do you know what it's like to read about your own mother being called a thief?" Her words cut deep, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Rachel, listen to me. Your father has been using me for years. He's been hiding debts, funneling money through my accounts, making me look like the one spending when it was him all along. The police are investigating. I'm not the liar here." Her eyes filled with tears. "But Dad, he swore he was telling the truth." I leaned forward, gripping her hands. "Rachel, I've never lied to you. Never. Can you honestly say the same about your father? Think back, how many times has he promised you something and then disappeared? How many times has he taken credit for things he didn't do? You know him, Rachel? Deep down, you know what kind of man he is." She flinched, pulling her hands back, her tears spilling over. For a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who ran to me after nightmares, who believed I could fix anything. But then her expression hardened, the wall slamming back into place. "I don't know who to believe anymore," she whispered, standing abruptly. I need time." And just like that, she was gone. I sat in the silence that followed, my heart aching, my hands trembling. Losing Rachel's trust hurt more than any lawsuit, more than any debt. It was like losing a piece of myself. The next morning, Claire called with news that jolted me from despair. "Mary," she said, her voice sharp with urgency, "we've found something. Daniel has been moving money into an offshore account. And get this, the account is in Derek's name. Froze. Derek. My son-in-law, Derek. Yes, which means your daughter is caught up in this whether she realizes it or not. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the entire wedding being used as a front for Daniel's scheme. He's not just trying to ruin you, Mary. He's using his own daughter as a pawn." The words sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly, Rachel's confusion, her tears, her silence, they all made sense. She was tangled in Daniel's web without even realizing it. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with images of Rachel, blindsided by betrayal, crushed under the weight of her father's lies. As much as she had hurt me, as much as she had believed him over me, she was still my daughter, and I couldn't let her go down with him. The following week, the first court hearing was scheduled. I walked into the courthouse with Claire and Michael flanking me, the weight of the world pressing on my shoulders. Daniel was already there, flanked by his expensive lawyer and wearing his trademark smug grin. Rachel and Derek sat behind him, Rachel's eyes red and swollen, Derek's arm possessively tight around her shoulders. The judge entered and the room hushed. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the opening statements. Daniel's lawyer painted me as unstable. A compulsive spender who had manipulated her ex-husband and daughter for financial gain. He waved receipts and documents that twisted reality until even I felt dizzy. Then it was our turn. Claire rose with the poise of a warrior and began to dismantle their claims one by one. She presented evidence of Daniel's debts, his offshore accounts, the checks he had rerouted. Each revelation struck like a hammer against his carefully constructed facade. And then Claire called Officer Blake to the stand. He testified calmly, methodically, laying out the investigation's findings. The offshore accounts. The forged receipts. The manipulation of my financial history. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the pieces fell into place. Daniel's face darkened, his jaw tightening, his eyes darting with barely concealed rage. But the real shock came when Claire, her voice steady, announced, "Your Honor, we also have reason to believe that Mr. Harris has involved his son-in-law, Derek Wallace, in these fraudulent transfers." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Rachel turned to Derek in horror, her lips parting, her face draining of color. "Derek?" She whispered loud enough for the silence to carry. "Is this true?" Derek's face tightened, his hand gripping hers until she winced. "Don't listen to them, Rachel. It's all lies." But I could see it in her eyes, the first cracks of doubt, the first flicker of realization. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. The seed of truth had been planted. As the session adjourned for the day, Daniel brushed past me, his eyes narrowed, his voice a venomous hiss only I could hear. "You think you've won something? This is just the beginning. I'll destroy you, Mary, and I'll take Rachel with me if I have to." I stood frozen, his words ringing in my ears like a curse. But deep inside, beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred. Because if Daniel wanted war, then war he would have. And this time I wasn't fighting alone. The courtroom fight left a residue in the air like smoke from a long ago fire. Everything felt faintly charred. The edges of ordinary life singed. For days after that hearing, my mailbox was a war zone of letters, subpoenas, anonymous threats, and glossy flyers from some local reputation management firm offering to handle personal crises discreetly. Daniel's strategy was obvious and ugly. Muddy the water so deep that nobody could tell truth from lie. That did not stop Claire. If anything, it galvanized her. We worked in a rhythm I came to rely on. She collected evidence and interrogated. The inconsistencies, Michael tracked digital footprints and statements. And this was the first time in years. I felt like I could take action rather than merely absorb the next round of pain, went through the minutia of receipts, emails, and text messages with a stubbornness that surprised me. I woke before dawn, poured coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a lamp that threw a small island of light across mountains of photocopied bank statements. I traced lines with my finger, connecting deposits to notes to the very nights Daniel had gone out for work dinners with colleagues he could never name. Twist one came quietly, like a spider slipping through the web. In the middle of a Tuesday morning, Michael burst through the door, waving his phone like a flag. "Mom, you need to see this," he said, breathless. It was a screenshot of an email thread between Daniel and Derek that had been forwarded to Michael by a mutual acquaintance who hated what Daniel was doing. The subject line was, "Mundane, wedding arrangements. But the body contained a line that twisted my stomach. Once Mary signs the deposit transfers, I'll reroute the rest through my account. Keep it clean. The email signature. D. Harris, and it was addressed to Derek Wallace. This was not a coincidence. Derek's name kept cropping up in a way that suddenly made the cozy dinners and polite smiles on the wedding photos look theatrical, like scenes from a play designed to distract. Claire stilled as she read it, eyes narrowing. "This is the thread we needed," she murmured. "We'll subpoena Derek's communications. If he's complicit, there's no way out for him." I felt a cold, calm descent then. My hands were steady as I signed the authorization for Claire to pursue the digital subpoenas. For the first time, the fear that had been a shadow at my heels began to shrink. The second twist arrived in the form of a voice message. It came late one night from a number I didn't recognize. The person on the other end spoke quickly, breathless, protective. "My name is Alina. I worked in Derek Wallace's office last year. I saw transfer small, seemingly inconsequential, directed to accounts with names that matched properties in Daniel Harris's portfolio. I didn't come forward before because I was scared, but now you should know. They told us it was for wedding expenses. They were joking. It's not jokes anymore." The message ended with a shaky exhale and a "please be careful." Elena's voice added to the tangle, but it also shone a light on aspects I had not considered. Suddenly, the wedding was not only the stage for our family's shame, it was a conduit to other people's greed. Derek might have been more than foolish and lovey, might have been the willing partner in a scheme. But the betrayal cut into me in layers by Daniel, of course, but by Rachel's husband, Diff True, by the golden sheen of the wedding that had hidden ugly trades. We called Alina, found her, and she agreed to speak to Claire on record. Her testimony was thin. At first, she hadn't been privy to contracts or ledgers, but she provided details I would not have heard on my own. Certain meeting times, vague. References to reconciling accounts, and a name she heard more than once: Lucien, an accountant who ran offshore paperwork for the Harris family. Lucien, according to her, had been present at more than one dinner where these wedding expenses came up. Now we had a trail. Derek, Lucien, offshore accounts, forged receipts. The fabric of Daniel's defense was fraying. But Daniel never capitulated quietly. In the third twist, he unleashed a smear loose poisonous rumors that spread like mold. Anonymous social media accounts began to repost doctored images of me. Screenshots with fake bank balances and false captions that implicated me in theft and greed. One particularly nasty post claimed that I had pocketed gratuities meant for the kitchen staff at the wedding. Another, more elaborate, suggested I intended to sue my daughter to extract more money. It was ugly and petty and designed to wound where it hurt most the relationships I had left. Friends who had been distant called to ask if everything was okay, not because they cared, but because they wanted to know how to distance themselves. Claire filed motions for defamation and a cease and desist, but the damage social media does lingers like a stain. I learned to breathe around the accusations, to let Michael read the worst comments and then shred them like bitter paper. That's when I realized something else: an unexpected ally could be more useful than any legal brief. Alina, braver than she might have known, was willing to let Claire record a witness statement. We also discovered that Lucien, the accountant, had been sloppy enough to leave fragments of ledger entries on a shared cloud that had accidentally been accessible to a former associate. Claire played the files for me in her office. Excel sheets. Dates, codenames for accounts, the same ones Officer Blake had traced. My name appeared as a proxy on transfers for tax purposes. The very maneuver Daniel's lawyer had called legitimate bookkeeping. But in the margins, there were notes, route via Derek June and cleared by DH. Those marginal notes were a map of intent. There was a moment late at night in Claire's conference room when the puzzle slammed into place. "He's been using your name to move money and hide liabilities," Claire said, folding her hands. "And Derek either assisted or was used as a co-signer." Either way, it's not looking good for them. I felt a hollow victory at that statement. It meant vindication, sure, but also more pen evidence now meant more retaliation was coming. And it did. The fourth twist hit like a physical blow. The day after we filed a motion to subpoena Derek's accounts, my mailbox held a letter from Derek's father, who had attended the wedding with sober pomp. He had written an op-ed in the local paper, a thinly veiled plea for privacy. But the subtext was venomous. He called my public outburst at the wedding an unnecessary spectacle, and insisted that the Harris family was committed to transparency. The article painted Daniel as a hardworking man beset by a vindictive ex-wife. And in the parentheses, cruel, as an aside, it implied mental instability without naming me. It was an attempt to preempt the court to sway public opinion. The battle had become not only legal but cultural. Who gets believed when a man screams a woman is unstable? How many times had I been gaslit in my life by men whose charm rearranged the facts? I sat in my kitchen, the glow of my laptop like a small moon, and listened to Michael calm me. "Let them talk," he said. "We have Claire. We have Blake. We have evidence. We'll let the court make the judgment." Still, the smear hurt. It hurt in the marrow. One afternoon, as the weather turned hot and heavy, Officer Blake called, with a development that made me breathe as if I'd run a marathon. "We've got a warrant," he said. "We're executing it on Lucien's office this afternoon. We think he's been keeping ledgers off the books. Physical copies in a safe deposit box." The words were electric in my veins. Dawn found us at the courthouse again. But this time, Claire and I were not just participants in a hearing. We were watchers of a raid. I sat behind metal barriers in a public corridor as plainclothes officers carried plastic bins out of a downtown office. Their faces grim, their motions practiced. Inside those bins were the kind of paper that lawyers dream about: bank statements, account numbers, signed authorizations. I held my breath when I saw the officers lift out a thin leather-bound notebook, edges worn, the spine cracked like old skin. An officer untied it and handed it to Blake. He flipped it open and stared. "What is it?" Claire asked, the question raw with hope and dread. Blake didn't answer right away. He read, and his jaw set like a hinge. "This is Lucien's client ledger," he said finally. "He's been meticulous, which is unusual for someone covering up wrongdoing. Look here, D. Harris Wedding Conduit. And here, Proxy M. Harris signed." I felt the floor of the world tilt beneath me. And my name, in black and white. As a proxy, yes, but the ledger included dates, corroborating the email threads we had found, and crucially, it included a scanned, slightly smudged image of a check that matched my signature, but with numbers in the memo line that suggested the funds had been redirected. The ledger contained small, almost offhand notes about conversations. Derek confirmed at 8/12's meeting client seeks, cover 4 payments, and a list of account numbers that matched the offshore accounts Blake had traced before. This ledger was a bomb. It wasn't proof of my guilt. Claire and Blake both agreed it was proof of Daniel's and Derek's scheme to make it look like I was paying when, in fact, money had been moved to other pockets. But it was also a signed ledger in Lucien's handwriting. And that gave the prosecution and the court eventually one of the predictability and clarity that Daniel had tried to erase. I am not going to pretend the ledger made everything easy. The fifth twist made the world crankier. As soon as Lucien's ledger became evidence, he disappeared. He had, Claire surmised, fled the country, possibly to a jurisdiction that wouldn't honor extradition for financial fraud. That meant we had a ledger that spoke in fragments, names and numbers and hints, but no witness to the final steps of the money trail. Without Lucien's testimony, Derek could say he'd been naive. Daniel could claim he'd been manipulated, and our case could slow to the frustrating molasses of long, expensive litigation. But even without Lucien, the ledger destabilized Daniel's narrative. Newspapers that had once parroted his father's op-ed now ran pieces quoting Lucien's ledger. The email threads, and our witnesses. People who had been whispering at cocktail parties suddenly avoided Daniel's gaze. It was a small, imperfect victory. That victory, however, came with a price. Daniel's response was vicious and personal. He lost his temper in ways I hadn't seen since the children were small. He began calling my workplace, shouting, accusing, claiming I was unfit and dangerous. He circulated more rumors that damaged my social standing. And one afternoon, a car cut me off on my way to a clinic shift in a way that felt deliberate. I reported it. Claire labeled it harassment and insisted we document everything. Then came the threat that cut nearest to the bone. A text message on my phone from a blocked number. The message was simple. Stay out of my life, Mary, or you'll lose more than money. For a few days I allowed myself to be afraid. Small, secret, private kind of fear that makes your palms clammy. But I will not lie, fear also sharpened me. I tightened security on the house, changed routines, and for the first time in decades I felt like I was standing guard over my own life. And then, just when the legal storm felt like it might break into a storm of exposure that would finally topple Daniel, the sixth twist arrived in the cruelest form. Rachel called me in the middle of the night, her voice a bare thread. "Mom," she whispered. "They found Derek. He's in the hospital." Her words hit like a physical force. "He collapsed at his office. They say he had a stroke. He's not doing well." Confrontation with truth happens in the strangest ways. My first reaction was unmarshalable, part dread, part relief at an irony so sharp it hurt. Had he been punished? Was this a body's reaction to guilt? Or had he been poisoned by stress? Stories piled up like plates. People were quick to accuse him of collapsing under the weight of lies. Daniel, predictably, spun it. My son-in-law was a hard-working, stressed man. This is no time for public attacks. Rachel came over the next day, eyes rimmed with red in fear. She stayed at my house not as a cold daughter, but as a frightened woman by her husband's side. I sat with her on my sagging couch, and for the first time since the wedding, I saw vulnerability crack through her armor. She was shaking. She leaned into me and let slip the tiniest admission, raw and human. "I don't know what to believe, Mom." In the hospital waiting room, the air smelled of antiseptic and bad coffee. Derek's family hovered, gloved in performative grief. Daniel maintained a rigid composure that looked more like control than sorrow. The doctors spoke in clipped, term stroke, clotting, rehabilitation. It was medically mundane and emotionally catastrophic. And then, as I sat in a plastic chair in the corridor, my phone buzzed. It was Claire. "We need to talk," she said. "There's something about Derek's accounts." "Thought we already had their trail," I replied, voice flat. "No, it's bigger," Claire said. "There's a transfer one last transfer 2 days before. Derek collapsed, large, from an account that ties back to a shell company Daniel has used before. It's possible Derek found out something and tried to reverse a payment. Or," she paused, "or someone tried to make him quiet." The waiting room felt suddenly like a stage whose curtains were about to drop. My mind raced with possible horrors, each worse than the last. Had Derek been trying to do the right thing? Had he been a pawn who suddenly realized he wanted to stop playing? Or had someone decided to stop him? And in that moment, as I sat there with the antiseptic tang on my tongue, the worst, most visceral fear bubbled up. What if Derek's collapse was not a consequence, but a catalyst? What if whatever he had learned or attempted to reverse could endanger Rysel or even me? The hospital monitor bleeped like a metronome, measuring out anxiety. My phone buzzed again. A new message. From an unknown email. "Mary," it read, short and precise. "If you want Rachel safe, stop digging. Consider this your only warning." The words were an ice knife. The room spun. The monitor bleeped on, oblivious. Everything I had fought for, truth, dignity, the right to be more than a bank, had cornered me in a place where the stakes were no longer financial. They had become personal, violent in their implications. I stood, grabbed my bag, and walked out of the hospital into the white glare of midday, the sun like an indifferent jury. My legs felt thin. My phone buzzed relentlessly with updates from Claire and Officer Blake. We had to move fast. Evidence had to be secured. Witnesses protected. Rachel needed answers. Derek needed a miracle. As I reached the car, my hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped my keys. I felt a new clarity settle on me like armor. Threats were now part of the landscape. But fear would not be the landscape's governor. I had come this far. And yet, as I slid into the driver's seat and drove, there was a small tremor of dread that would not leave me. The ledger, the emails, Lucien's flight note of it explained who had sent the message, or why someone would move from financial sabotage to direct threats. Was Daniel escalating? Had he always been more dangerous than I had imagined? Or was there someone else, someone hidden in the periphery who stood to profit if the whole Harris facade remained intact? Those questions roiled in my mind as I pulled into my driveway. I turned the key, stepped out, and there, at my doorstep, on the mat where the mail usually lay, was an envelope that chilled me, my name written in a slow, precise hand. No return address. No stamp. Inside was a single Polaroid. In the photograph, taken from a distance, someone had captured Rachel leaving our house the night before, her head down, her coat pulled up like armor. On the back of the photo, a single sentence: "We're watching." The cliffhanger was absolute. The war was no longer only about money or reputation. It had become a matter of safety, of secrets so dangerous that someone would reach beyond financial ruin to silence a man, and now threaten the women who had caught the light of his crimes. The Polaroid shook in my hand like it carried the tremor of my pulse. Rachel's figure, hunched in her coat, was frozen in grainy stillness. Whoever had taken it had been close to close. The note scrawled on the back was short, precise, and terrifying. "We're watching." For the first time in weeks, my knees nearly gave out. The war of bills, bank accounts, and accusations had shifted into something darker. This wasn't just about money anymore. Someone was staking claim to fear itself. I locked the door, double-bolted it, and called Claire immediately. My voice broke as I explained the envelope, the Polaroid, the words. Her reply was iron. "Mary, you don't go anywhere alone. Not until this is over. I'll contact Blake." This crosses the line into intimidation. If Daniel thinks this is going to scare you into silence, he's about to learn what fear really feels like in a courtroom. But fear is a complicated thing. Fear doesn't just shrink you. It also sharpens you. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, Polaroid in front of me, legal papers spread like battle maps. I realized I'd been waiting for someone to protect me: Claire, Blake, even Michael. But if Rachel was in danger, if Derek's collapse had been triggered by knowledge too dangerous to carry, then I couldn't just be a client in a case. I had to be a soldier. I didn't sleep. Instead, I traced the chain of evidence over and over, following Lucien's ledgers, the email threads, Elena's testimony. One phrase in Lucien's notebook caught my attention, something I hadn't lingered on before. Final transfer routed. 8/14 priority. Silence guaranteed. Silence guaranteed. Two words that burrowed into my bones. What if that wasn't financial jargon? What if Derek's collapse hadn't been natural? By dawn, my eyes ached from exhaustion, but my mind was sharp as glass. I needed answers. And the only person who could give them, whether he liked it or not, was Daniel. 2 days later, we faced each other in court again. The hearing room felt more like a theater of war than justice. Daniel sat there with his snake oil smile, his lawyer sleek and polished beside him. Rachel hovered in the gallery, her expression fractured between loyalty and dawning suspicion. Claire's opening was surgical. The ledger pages projected on the screen, Lucien's handwriting visible to all. Then she called Officer Blake, who walked the judge through the offshore accounts, the shell companies, and the forged transfers. The judge listened intently, his brows furrowed, his pen scratching notes. When Daniel's lawyer rose to speak, he twisted the story as expected. Lucien was unreliable. Derek's involvement was incidental, and I was a spurned ex-wife with a vendetta. His words oozed like oil. slick but transparent to anyone willing to see through the sheen. Then came the turning point. Claire requested permission to present the Polaroid. My breath caught as she held it up, gloves shielding her fingers. Your Honor, this was delivered anonymously to my client's home. On the back were the words, "We're watching. We contend this is a direct attempt to intimidate Mrs. Harris into abandoning her defense." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Daniel's face twitched just slightly, but enough. His composure cracked for the briefest second. I've seized that moment. Against Claire's plan, against the script we'd rehearsed, I rose from my seat. My voice shook but grew stronger with every word. Your Honor, I have been called many things in this courtroom. Greedy, dishonest, unstable, but I have lived my life working 2 jobs to feed my children while my ex-husband posed as a generous man. I have been bled dry for years, not just of money, but of dignity. And now when the truth is finally coming to light, someone dares threaten my daughter, the only family I still have a chance of saving. I am done being silent. I will not be intimidated. I will not be bought. And I will not allow Daniel Harris to hide behind lies anymore. The words rang out, unplanned, raw, alive. For a heartbeat, the courtroom held its breath. Then Rachel stood. My daughter. My child who had stayed silent, who had looked at me with suspicion and anger for weeks. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Your Honor, I need to say something. The judge allowed it. Rachel turned, not to me, but to Derek's father, to Daniel, to everyone assembled. Tears glistened on her cheeks. I believed my father when he said my mom was unstable. I believed Derek when he said the money was fine. But 2 nights ago, I went through Derek's files. There are transfers, large ones, 2 accounts I don't recognize. Some in my name. Our voice broke. I think they used me too. I think Derek and Dad used me as another shield. The room erupted in murmurs. Daniel lunged up, his face purple. Rachel, sit down. But she didn't. She looked straight at the judge, her voice suddenly fierce. If you want the truth, look at Derek's accounts. They'll show everything. That was the moment the case shifted. The judge ordered an immediate review of Derek's accounts. Blake coordinated with his team, and within hours, evidence poured in. Derek had indeed been complicit, whether willingly or under Daniel's direction. Transfers in Rachel's name. Offshore payments marked as gifts. And the final, massive transfer 2 days before Derek's collapse money that had vanished into a black hole of shadow companies. The courtroom became a crucible. Daniel's mask shattered. His lawyer tried to object, tried to stall, but the judge's gavel silenced him. The evidence was overwhelming. The final confrontation came not in the courtroom, but outside it. As the day adjourned, I stepped into the hallway, my body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Daniel stormed toward me, his eyes wild, his voice a hiss only I could hear. You think you've won? You think this is over? I made you, Mary. Without me, you're nothing. I stared at him, truly stared. For the first time in my life, I saw not a powerful man, not a manipulator, not even my children's father. I saw a desperate, hollow shell, clinging to lies that were collapsing around him. I smiled. A small, quiet smile. No, Daniel. Without me, you're nothing. And now everyone knows it. Security pulled him back as his rage erupted, but I walked away, my steps steady. Weeks later, the verdict came. Daniel was found guilty of fraud, financial manipulation, and attempted intimidation. Derek, recovering slowly from his stroke, faced charges as well, though Rachel's testimony helped mitigate her direct involvement. Lucien remained missing, but his ledgers sealed the case. The resolution wasn't glamorous. Daniel didn't leave in handcuffs under flashing lights. He was stripped down quietly, methodically, by the justice system he thought he could manipulate. But justice came all the same. And for me? For the first time in decades, my bank account wasn't the center of my existence. I wasn't an ATM, a wallet, a proxy. I was Mary Harris, mother, survivor, woman. Rachel and I sat together one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky with streaks of gold. Her hand slipped into mine, tentative, fragile. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I should have believed you." I squeezed her hand, my throat tight. We start fresh. No more debts between us. Only love. The reflection came easily then, as if carried on the breeze. Boundaries matter. Respect matters. And silence only protects the guilty. Speaking up, even when your voice shakes, is how you reclaim your dignity. I had been bled for years, but in the end, I found something Daniel could never buy, never steal, never forge: freedom. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew I would never, ever let anyone reduce me to an ATM again.